Long before the first sword was raised in the name of the Knights Templar, before white cloaks bore red crosses across battlefields, there were whispers. Not the kind recorded in chronicles or sung by priests, but quieter ones, passed between stones, carried through underground corridors, and sealed behind walls no sunlight had touched for centuries. These whispers did not speak of war or conquest. They spoke of something buried, something forbidden, something powerful enough that history itself would later be bent to hide it. Jerusalem has always been a city layered upon itself. Every step taken upon its streets is a step over forgotten centuries. Beneath churches, mosques, and ancient walls lies another Jerusalem, one carved into bedrock, threaded with tunnels, sealed chambers, and foundations older than memory. At the heart of this buried world stands the Temple Mount, a place sacred to three religions and feared by those who understood its deeper significance. It was here, according to tradition, that Solomon built his legendary temple. It was here that divine wisdom was said to dwell. And it was here that something was lost. When the First Crusade ended and Jerusalem fell into Christian hands in 1099, Europe celebrated a military victory. But history may have misunderstood what came next. In the years following the conquest, a small group of knights arrived in the city. They did not behave like conquerors. They did not demand land, riches, or titles. Instead, they asked for something far stranger: permission to occupy the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. 9 men, poorly armed, barely noticed. Officially, they were tasked with protecting pilgrims traveling dangerous roads. Yet for nearly a decade, no records describe them escorting anyone at all. Instead, these men lived in silence atop the most archaeologically sensitive ground on Earth. Beneath their sleeping quarters lay tunnels long sealed, chambers deliberately hidden, and relics the church itself had never fully understood. The official histories would later describe the Knights Templar as warrior monks, men of faith sworn to poverty and obedience. But this image, repeated endlessly, conceals a deeper unease. Because when these knights emerged from obscurity, they were no longer poor. They were no longer insignificant. They possessed influence, wealth, and knowledge that should have been impossible for 9 men to acquire in such a short time. What changed beneath the Temple Mount? Ancient texts hint that Solomon's temple was never just a place of worship. It was described as a house of wisdom, built according to precise mathematical laws, aligned with the heavens, and infused with secrets granted by God himself. Some legends claim it housed objects capable of amplifying human consciousness. Others speak of devices that produced light without flame, sound without voice, and power without fire. Over time, these stories were dismissed as metaphor. Safer that way. But metaphors do not require secrecy. They do not require tunnels to be sealed or records destroyed. The Temple Mount had been guarded for centuries, not only by armies, but by silence. Even during Roman occupation, certain areas beneath it were left untouched. When the temple was destroyed, survivors spoke of priests hiding sacred objects deep underground before the walls fell. Objects never recovered. Objects never mentioned again, at least not openly. By the time the Templars arrived, much of this knowledge had faded into myth. But myth has a habit of surviving where truth is inconvenient. And the church, newly established in Jerusalem, may have known more than it admitted. Granting the Templars access to the Temple Mount was no small favor. It was a calculated decision, one that suggests the knights were trusted or feared enough to be allowed near something dangerous. Night after night, according to later speculation, the knights descended below the surface. They would have worked by torchlight, carefully navigating ancient passageways filled with debris and traps designed to keep intruders out. These were not random tunnels. They followed deliberate patterns, aligned with cardinal directions and sacred geometry. Whoever built them had knowledge far beyond what medieval Europe understood. And then there is the silence. For 9 years, almost nothing is written about what the knights found. No inventories, no reports, no relics proudly displayed. Instead, when the order finally emerged in a public view, they did so fully formed, recognized by the church, endorsed by kings, and granted privileges no other group had ever received. They answered to no nation. They paid no taxes. They were permitted to build fortresses, command armies, and move freely across borders. Such power is never given without reason. Some historians argue this was merely political convenience. Others suggest it was fear. Because what if the knights had uncovered something that challenged the very foundation of church authority? Something that suggested divine power was not exclusive to priests. Something that could be learned, replicated, or used. Knowledge is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands. Especially knowledge that predates doctrine. The whispers beneath the Temple Mount grow louder when examined through this lens. They suggest that the Templars did not simply find relics, but fragments of a forgotten science, one rooted in resonance, geometry, and natural forces rather than prayer alone. A science once understood by ancient civilizations and deliberately erased after it proved too powerful. If true, this would explain why the Church later turned on the Templars with such ferocity. Why confessions were forced. Why record vanished. Why even today, discussion of what lay beneath the Temple Mount remains sensitive, restricted, and politically explosive. History prefers clean stories, heroes and villains, faith and heresy. But real history is messy. It hides in places we are told not to look. And sometimes, the most important events happen not on battlefields, but underground, out of sight, in the dark where whispers wait patiently for centuries. This story does not begin with fire or blood. It begins with silence, with 9 men standing atop ancient stone, listening to echoes that were never meant to be heard again. History tells us that the Knights Templar were born out of chaos. The roads to Jerusalem, newly conquered during the First Crusade, were dangerous and unforgiving. Pilgrims traveling from Europe were robbed, attacked, and often killed before ever reaching the Holy City. According to official records, it was this crisis that inspired a small band of knights to take holy vows and dedicate themselves to protecting the faithful. It is a story repeated in textbooks and sermons alike. Simple, logical, comforting, and possibly incomplete. Around the year 1119, a French knight named Hugues de Payens stepped forward with a proposal that would change medieval history. Alongside 8 companions, he pledged himself to a new kind of life, one that merged the discipline of a monk with the violence of a soldier. Poverty, chastity, obedience. These were the vows. Their mission, at least on paper, was defensive. They would guard pilgrims on the long roads between Jaffa and Jerusalem. They would ask for nothing in return. No land, no gold, no titles. Yet from the very beginning, the story does not quite fit. 9 knights could not possibly secure vast and dangerous roads stretching hundreds of miles. They lacked manpower, resources, and support. Even contemporary chroniclers seem puzzled by the claim. There are no early reports of heroic rescues or battles fought in defense of pilgrims. No songs, no legends. For nearly a decade, the order exists in a historical fog, officially present but practically invisible. What they did receive, however, was extraordinary. Almost immediately, King Baldwin II of Jerusalem granted them quarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, built directly atop the ruins of Solomon's Temple. This was no ordinary accommodation. Space in Jerusalem was limited and fiercely contested. Religious orders, nobles, and military leaders all competed for influence and land. Yet this small, improving group was given residence at the most sacred and strategically significant site in the city. Such generosity demands explanation. The church soon followed with its own endorsement. Though the order had not yet proven its value in battle, it was recognized and quietly protected. There were no demands for accountability, no scrutiny. It was as if their presence served a purpose that did not need to be spoken aloud. To understand why, one must look beyond medieval politics and toward the mindset of the early church. Christianity in the 12th century was not merely a faith. It was an institution struggling to control knowledge, belief, and power in a fragmented world. Ancient texts circulated beyond official doctrine. Gnostic traditions persisted in secret. Islamic scholars preserved Greek science that Europe had long forgotten. The Church knew that not all truths strengthened its authority. A new kind of order, one bound by secrecy, discipline, and absolute loyalty, may have been the perfect instrument to investigate dangerous knowledge without publicly acknowledging its existence. The men who joined the early Templar order were not random warriors. Many came from noble families with access to education, ancient libraries, and oral traditions passed down through generations. Some historians believe they were chosen not for their strength, but for their ability to keep secrets. They were men who understood obedience not just to God, but to silence. When the order was formally recognized at the Council of Troyes in 1129, it received an endorsement that transformed it overnight. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential religious figures of the age, personally wrote their rule. In his writings, Bernard described the Templars not merely as soldiers, but as instruments of divine will. He spoke of them in almost mystical terms, as if their mission extended beyond physical warfare. This spiritual framing is significant. By redefining violence as sacred, the Church created a moral shield around the order. The Templars could kill without sin, conquer without guilt, and operate beyond normal moral boundaries. Such freedom would have been unthinkable for ordinary knights. But these were not ordinary men. They were something new, something experimental, and experiments always serve a purpose. The vows of poverty taken by the Templars were symbolic rather than practical. Individually, they owned nothing. Collectively, they would soon own everything. Donations poured in from across Europe, land, gold, relics, and rights. Kings entrusted them with treasure. Pilgrims entrusted them with their lives and fortunes. The order became a financial network unlike anything the medieval world had seen. But wealth alone does not explain the fear they inspired. There is an unease in the language used by their critics, even in the early years. Whispers of arrogance, accusations of secrecy, rumors that they knew things they should not. These murmurs did not emerge from nowhere. They reflect an instinctive discomfort, an awareness that the Templars were operating according to rules no one else could see. The term warrior-monk itself is a contradiction. Monks renounced the world. Warriors dominated. Combining the two created a being that answered to neither secular nor religious authority alone. The Templars stood in a liminal space between heaven and earth, faith and force, knowledge and obedience. And that is precisely where dangerous ideas thrive. The Church may have believed it could control this new order. After all, it had written their rules, blessed their mission, and sanctioned their violence. But control requires understanding. And it is possible that even in these early years, the Templars began to understand something the Church did not. Their discipline was absolute, their internal hierarchy rigid, their symbols encoded with meaning. The red cross they wore was not merely a sign of martyrdom. Some believe it represented sacred intersections, geometric balance, and the meeting of divine and human realms. Whether intentional or not, the imagery carried echoes of older traditions. As the order grew, so did its isolation. Templars answered only to the Pope, but even papal authority had limits when knowledge was at stake. Secrecy became not just a habit, but a survival mechanism. What began as obedience slowly transformed into independence. And independence, in the medieval world, was unforgivable. The birth of the Knights Templar was not an accident of history. It was a calculated response to a world filled with competing truths and buried knowledge. They were created to serve, but also to seek, to defend, but also to uncover. Whether the Church intended this dual role or lost control of it remains one of history's most unsettling questions. Because once knowledge is found, it cannot be unfound. And once warriors are taught to think like monks, and monks like guardians of secrets, the balance of power begins to shift. The Church would one day realize this. But by then, it would already be too late. There's a stretch of time in the early history of the Knights Templar that resists explanation. It is not marked by battles, treaties, or heroic deeds. Instead, it is defined by absence. For nearly 9 years after their founding, the order leaves almost no trace in the historical record. No detailed accounts of patrols, no records of pilgrim protection, no lists of victories or losses. For a medieval military order, this silence is extraordinary. And it is within this silence that the idea of a forbidden mission takes shape. According to official accounts, the Templars were sworn to protect pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. Yet the roads they were meant to guard remained dangerous for years. Attacks continued. Other military orders eventually took on the responsibility more effectively. This raises a troubling question. If the Templars were not fulfilling their stated purpose, what were they doing instead? The answer, many believe, lies beneath their feet. The 9 original knights were granted quarters at the Temple Mount almost immediately. Not a fortress on the city's edge, not a barracks along the pilgrim routes, but the most sacred, most restricted location in Jerusalem. This was not coincidence. Access to the Temple Mount meant access to layers of history sealed away since antiquity. It meant proximity to the ruins of Solomon's Temple, a structure legendary not only for its religious significance, but for the knowledge it was said to contain. Ancient Jewish texts describe the temple as a place where heaven and earth intersected. Its construction followed precise measurements dictated by divine instruction. Every stone, every chamber, every object served a purpose beyond symbolism. The Holy of Holies, sealed from all but the high priest, was said to house artifacts through which God communicated with humanity. After the temple's destruction, these objects vanished from history. Or so the story goes. By the time the Templars arrived, the Temple Mount had been rebuilt, destroyed, and rebuilt again. Yet much of its subterranean structure remained intact. Tunnels, cisterns, sealed vaults, some dating back to the First Temple period, lay hidden beneath newer constructions. Even Islamic custodians of the site acknowledged the existence of vast underground spaces they did not fully understand. For 9 years, the Templars lived directly above this buried world. Later architectural surveys revealed evidence of deliberate excavation during this period. Tunnel systems show signs of medieval tools. Chambers once sealed were reopened. Debris was cleared, not randomly, but methodically. This was not looting. It was searching. What were they looking for? Some believe the Templars sought the Ark of the Covenant, the legendary chest said to contain the tablets of the law and the power of God himself. Others suggest they searched for sacred texts, scrolls predating the Bible, offering alternative versions of creation, consciousness, and divine authority. Still others argue they uncovered technological relics from an advanced ancient civilization, misunderstood as holy objects by later generations. The truth may lie somewhere between these theories. The Ark, for example, is often described in terms that resemble a machine rather than a symbol. It produced light. It emitted sound. It killed those who touched it improperly. It required insulation and precise handling. These are not the qualities of a metaphor. They're the qualities of a device. If such an object existed, and if it was hidden beneath the temple, its discovery would have shaken the foundations of medieval belief. But the Templars did not announce any such discovery. Instead, they grew stronger. Within a decade of their arrival, the order was formally recognized, heavily funded, and granted unprecedented autonomy. This rapid rise suggests leverage. Influence gained not through force, but through possession of something valuable enough to ensure protection. Knowledge has always been more powerful than armies. The number 9 itself carries symbolic weight. In many ancient traditions, it represents completion, hidden wisdom, and initiation. Whether intentional or coincidental, the fact that exactly 9 knights were involved in this early mission has fueled speculation for centuries. These are not just founders. They were initiates. Each man likely played a specific role. Excavation requires planners, engineers, scholars, guards. It requires men capable of reading ancient languages, interpreting symbols, and understanding architectural alignments. The Templars were not ignorant brutes. Many were educated, multilingual, and exposed to Eastern knowledge systems unknown in Europe. Jerusalem at the time was a crossroads of civilizations. Islamic scholars preserved texts from Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. Jewish mystics studied Kabbalah. Eastern Christians held traditions suppressed in Rome. Information flowed quietly through markets, libraries, and whispered conversations. The Templars were perfectly positioned to absorb it all. And absorb they did. What they found beneath the Temple Mount was likely fragmented, incomplete, and dangerous. Dangerous not because it was evil, but because it challenged the narrative of divine monopoly. If sacred power could be built, measured, or understood, then faith alone was no longer enough to control it. This may explain the secrecy. Rather than revealing their discoveries, the Templars encoded them. In symbols, in architecture, in rituals. Knowledge was not written down plainly. It was hidden in plain sight, accessible only to those trained to see it. This method ensured survival, even if the order itself was destroyed. The forbidden mission was not about possession. It was about preservation. Over time, rumors began to circulate. Accusations of heresy, claims that the Templars worshipped strange idols, stories of secret rites conducted in darkness. While many of these accusations were fabricated centuries later, they may have been inspired by fragments of truth. The Templars did hold rituals unknown to the Church. They did guard secrets they refused to share. And they did believe that certain knowledge was too dangerous for the uninitiated. The Church tolerated this, at first. Perhaps it believed it could control the flow of information. Or perhaps it feared what would happen if the Templars spoke openly. Silence can be a form of agreement, but it can also be a sign of dread. By the end of their 9-year silence, the Templars were no longer merely knights. They were custodians of something ancient and unresolved. Their mission beneath the Temple Mount had ended, but its consequences had only begun. Whatever they found, it would follow them across Europe, shape their rise, and ultimately seal their fate. Because history is unforgiving to those who uncover truths it is not ready to face. To understand what the Knights Templar may have uncovered, one must first understand the place itself. The Temple Mount is not merely a religious site. It is an archaeological labyrinth, a layered archive of civilizations built one atop another, each attempting to claim divine legitimacy through stone. Beneath its surface lies a hidden world that few have seen and even fewer have been allowed to study. It is here, in this forbidden underground, that the Templars' true work is believed to have taken place. Long before medieval Jerusalem, the hill was sacred. Canaanites worshipped there. Israelites built Solomon's temple upon it. Babylonians destroyed it. Persians rebuilt. Romans leveled it. Each era left scars, foundations, and sealed chambers behind. Unlike ordinary cities, Jerusalem was never cleared before rebuilding. It was buried. Over centuries, this created an underground network of tunnels, cisterns, vaults, and passageways, some deliberately hidden, others forgotten. Ancient sources describe Solomon's temple as far more than a house of worship. It was said to be constructed using knowledge given directly by God, measurements aligned with the heavens, materials chosen for their resonance, and chambers designed for specific functions. Jewish tradition speaks of subterranean vaults built to protect sacred objects in times of invasion. These vaults were sealed, mapped only by priests, and erased from public memory. When the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 CE, chaos followed. According to legend, priests hid the most sacred items underground before the final breach. The Ark of the Covenant, ritual instruments, scrolls, and objects whose purposes were never fully explained simply vanished. Rome never paraded them. No conqueror displayed them. They were swallowed by the earth. Centuries later, the Temple Mount became off-limits to most forms of excavation. Even rulers feared disturbing it. By the time the Knights Templar arrived, the site was already surrounded by layers of political, religious, and spiritual tension. Granting them access was not a casual decision. It was a calculated risk. The Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, where the Templars were housed, sat directly over ancient foundations. Beneath it lay Solomon's stables, massive underground halls supported by stone pillars, capable of holding thousands. These structures were not medieval. They were ancient, engineered with precision and foresight. Nearby cisterns connected through channels carved deep into bedrock, forming a hidden water system that predated Roman occupation. Archaeological evidence suggests that during the early 12th century, new tunnels were cut, old ones reopened, and sealed chambers accessed. Medieval tool marks have been identified in several underground passages. These are not random digs. The excavations followed deliberate paths, suggesting the Templars had maps, instructions, or prior knowledge of where to search. This raises a disturbing possibility. The Templars may not have been searching blindly. They may have known exactly what they were looking for. Some researchers propose that ancient Jewish priests passed down oral maps of the temple's underground chambers. These maps, too dangerous to commit to writing, could have survived through secret lineages, eventually reaching Europe through diaspora communities. Others suggest Islamic scholars preserved texts describing the temple's hidden structures. Jerusalem, after all, was a meeting point of traditions, not a cultural vacuum. If the Templars gained access to such information, their excavations would have been purposeful and efficient. They would not have needed years to stumble upon discoveries. They would have known where to dig and where not to. What they may have found remains speculative, but patterns emerge. The Templars' sudden access to immense resources shortly after this period suggests a transformative discovery. They went from obscure knights to a power recognized by kings and popes. Such elevation requires more than faith. It requires leverage. Artifacts recovered from beneath the Temple Mount would have been unlike anything medieval Europe understood. Objects built with advanced metallurgy. Texts written in ancient languages. Devices whose functions were misinterpreted as divine. The line between religion and technology was not yet clearly drawn. What one age calls a miracle, another calls a machine. Descriptions of sacred objects in ancient texts often resemble technical manuals rather than poetry. Measurements are precise. Instructions are detailed. Warnings are practical. These are not the hallmarks of allegory. They are the fingerprints of applied knowledge. If the Templars uncovered such items, they would have faced an impossible choice. Reveal them and risk destabilizing the church. Hide them and become guardians of a truth that could never be spoken aloud. The decision they made shaped everything that followed. There is no record of grand relics being presented to the church at this time. No triumphal processions. No official declarations. Instead, silence. Silence followed by influence. Silence followed by privilege. Silence followed by fear. The church, for its part, did not attempt to reclaim the site or oversee the excavations. This absence is telling. Either it trusted the Templars completely, or it was afraid of what it might uncover itself. Institutions often prefer ignorance to accountability. Over time, access to the Temple Mount became restricted once more. Excavations ceased. The underground world returned to darkness. Whatever had been removed was gone. Whatever remained was sealed even deeper. Yet traces linger. Symbols used by the Templars after this period begin to reflect ancient motifs associated with sacred architecture and hidden knowledge. Their buildings across Europe incorporate geometric alignments matching those attributed to Solomon's temple. This suggests they were not merely inspired by legend. They were replicating something they had seen. The Temple Mount excavations were not an isolated event. They were the foundation of the Templars' rise and the seed of their eventual destruction. What was unearthed beneath Jerusalem could not remain buried forever. Even hidden knowledge cast shadows, and those shadows would stretch across centuries, haunting kings, frightening popes, and inspiring secret societies long after the last Templar was burned at the stake. The earth beneath the Temple Mount still holds secrets. Modern excavations remain restricted, politically charged, and incomplete. Perhaps that is fitting. Some places were never meant to give up their truths easily. And some discoveries, once made, cannot be undone, only hidden, waiting for another age brave or foolish enough to listen to the whispers below. When most people think of the Knights Templar, their imagination immediately turns to the Holy Grail. A golden cup, a sacred chalice, a vessel said to have held the blood of Christ. For centuries, this image has dominated popular culture, reinforced by legend, literature, and film. Yet this familiar version of the Grail may be the greatest distraction of all. Because if the Templars did uncover something beneath the Temple Mount, it was likely far stranger, far more powerful, and far less symbolic than a simple cup. The idea of the Grail as a physical object emerged long after the supposed events it describes. Early Christian texts are vague, inconsistent, and often metaphorical. Some describe a vessel. Others speak of knowledge, lineage, or divine presence. Over time, these meanings blurred, and the Church allowed the safest interpretation to rise to the surface, a holy object to be revered, not understood. But the Templars were not poets. They were engineers of survival, discipline, and secrecy. If they searched for something, it was not because it was beautiful or symbolic. It was because it mattered. Ancient descriptions of sacred relics often read like technical documents disguised as scripture, objects that emit light without flame, instruments that amplify sound, devices that require insulation, precise handling, and strict protocols. These are not qualities of religious metaphors. They are the characteristics of technology that does not fit comfortably into medieval understanding. Consider the Ark of the Covenant, often dismissed as a myth. It is described as producing deadly energy, requiring wooden poles and gold insulation, killing those who touched it improperly. It generated fear not because it was holy, but because it was dangerous. The priests who handled it followed exact procedures, not prayers. If such an object existed, it would have represented a form of ancient applied science, preserved by ritual rather than explanation. The Grail may belong to this same category. In some early traditions, the Grail is not a cup at all, but a stone. In others, it is described as radiant, capable of sustaining life, granting wisdom, or healing the land itself. These descriptions align less with Christian symbolism and more with legends of energy sources, frequency devices, or even advanced materials now lost to time. The Templars, exposed to Eastern knowledge and ancient texts, would have recognized these inconsistencies. They would have understood that sacred language often masks practical function. A device too powerful to explain is wrapped in myth. A technology too dangerous to share becomes holy. If the Templars recovered relics beneath the Temple Mount, they may have deliberately avoided calling them what they were. Naming gives power, but it also invites scrutiny. Instead, knowledge was compartmentalized, encoded, and protected by ritual and secrecy. This reframing changes everything. Rather than guardians of a single holy object, the Templars may have been custodians of a collection of ancient tools, each misunderstood by later generations. Instruments designed to measure, resonate, store, or transmit energy. Objects whose original purposes were forgotten, leaving only ritualized echoes behind. There are hints of this in the architecture associated with the Templars. Certain chapels display acoustic properties so precise that sound behaves unnaturally within them. Whispered words carry impossible distances. Vibrations linger. These effects are not accidental. They suggest experimentation with resonance, frequency, and harmonics, principles central to both ancient science and modern physics. Why would warrior monks care about such things? Because power does not always come from weapons. The Church, for centuries, maintained control not just through doctrine, but through mystery. Miracles reinforced belief. Relics inspired obedience. But what happens when miracles can be reproduced? When sacred effects can be understood, even harnessed, the divine becomes mechanical, and authority crumbles. This may explain the Church's eventual hostility toward the Templars. Accusations of heresy often included strange claims: idol worship, secret knowledge, forbidden rites. While many of these charges were fabricated under torture, they may reflect distorted truths. The Templars did possess objects and practices unfamiliar to Church officials. They did guard relics, not listed in any official inventory. Some legends claim the Templars carried a mysterious head, referred to as Baphomet. Scholars have debated this endlessly, dismissing it as nonsense or mistranslation. Yet the description of the object, a head that spoke, imparted wisdom, and brought prosperity, again suggests something other than superstition. Perhaps a device. Perhaps a symbol for something far more complex. The true danger of these relics was not their power alone, but their implications. They suggested that ancient civilizations understood forces modern societies had forgotten. That knowledge had been lost not through natural decay, but through deliberate suppression, and that the Church itself was not the sole heir to divine truth. If such relics existed, they could not be revealed openly. The medieval world was not ready to separate faith from function. To do so would have shattered the spiritual framework holding society together. The Templars, whether by choice or necessity, became silent intermediaries between ancient knowledge and a fearful present. Over time, the stories were simplified. Dangerous details were stripped away. The Grail became a cup. The Ark became a symbol. Sacred technology became miracle. This process made the past safe, but also incomplete. The legacy of these relics did not disappear. It transformed. Fragments of knowledge survived in coded form, embedded in architecture, symbolism, and secret traditions passed from one generation to the next. The Templars understood that truth could outlive persecution if it was disguised well enough. And so, the greatest mystery is not what the Grail was, but why we were taught the wrong story about it. Because sometimes, the most effective way to suppress the truth is not to destroy it, but to turn it into a fairy tale. The idea that the ancient world was primitive is one of the most persistent myths in modern history. We are taught to imagine a slow, linear progression, stone tools evolving into iron, superstition giving way to science, darkness yielding to enlightenment. Yet when we look closely at the archaeological record, this narrative begins to fracture. The past reveals moments of astonishing sophistication, flashes of knowledge that seem to appear suddenly, then vanish just as abruptly. These anomalies are not isolated curiosities. They form a pattern. And it is within this pattern that the forbidden technologies of the Knights Templar may find their origin. Long before the medieval period, civilizations existed that understood principles modern science would not formally articulate until centuries later. The ancient Egyptians aligned their monuments with stellar precision. The Greeks calculated planetary motion with mechanical devices. The Romans engineered materials that still outperform modern equivalents. These were not lucky accidents. They were the products of applied knowledge, refined over generations, and then somehow lost. The Antikythera mechanism is perhaps the most famous example. Discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece, this intricate device dates back over 2,000 years. Composed of interlocking bronze gears, it could predict eclipses, planetary movements, and celestial cycles with astonishing accuracy. It is, by all accounts, an analog computer. Its existence alone dismantles the idea that ancient peoples lacked technological sophistication. And yet, there is no clear lineage from the Antikythera mechanism to later devices. No gradual evolution. No surviving manuals. It appears fully formed, then disappears from history. This pattern repeats itself again and again. Roman concrete, for instance, remains a mystery. Structures built nearly 2 millennia ago still stand, their strength undiminished by time. Modern engineers struggle to replicate its durability. The recipe was lost after the fall of Rome, not rediscovered until very recently. And even now, it is not fully understood. Knowledge once common became forbidden by neglect. Then there is Greek fire, a substance so powerful it could burn on water. Its formula was guarded as a state secret, passed orally, and deliberately destroyed when the empire fell. Without its creators, the knowledge vanished. Fire became magic. Chemistry became myth. These examples force us to reconsider what was possible in the ancient world. They suggest that knowledge does not always advance. It can retreat, fracture, and be buried. Political collapse, religious suppression, and cultural upheaval can erase entire sciences in a single generation. By the time the Middle Ages arrived, Europe was not ignorant because it had never known knowledge. It was ignorant because knowledge had been deliberately removed. This is the world the Knights Templar inherited. As crusaders moved eastward, they encountered civilizations that had preserved ancient learning. Islamic scholars safeguarded Greek philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine while Europe struggled in intellectual isolation. Libraries in Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus held texts unknown in the West. Works describing geometry, optics, acoustics, and natural forces in precise, mathematical terms. The Templars were uniquely positioned to access this knowledge. They traveled freely across borders, spoke multiple languages, and operated outside the control of local authorities. Unlike most medieval Europeans, they were not suspicious of learning. They sought it. When combined with discoveries beneath the Temple Mount, this exposure could have created a dangerous synthesis. Ancient artifacts recovered from Jerusalem, interpreted through Eastern scientific understanding, would have revealed their true nature. What once appeared as holy relics might be recognized as tools. What was revered as divine intervention might be understood as manipulation of natural forces. This realization would have been revolutionary and terrifying, because if ancient civilizations had mastered such technologies, it meant that history was not a story of progress, but of amnesia. Humanity had fallen, not risen, and the Church, which claimed to guide mankind from darkness into light, stood atop the ruins of forgotten brilliance it could not control. The medieval Church was deeply uneasy with natural philosophy that threatened spiritual authority. Knowledge that explained miracles stripped them of their power. Alchemy, astronomy, and mathematics were tolerated only so long as they remained abstract. Applied science, science that worked, was dangerous. The Templars, however, were pragmatic. They understood logistics, engineering, and strategy. They built fortresses with mathematical precision. They managed supply chains across continents. They created financial systems centuries ahead of their time. These are not accidents. They were expressions of advanced understanding. Some historians suggest the Templars applied ancient principles of geometry and proportion to their constructions. Their castles were not merely defensive structures, but carefully balanced systems designed to withstand siege, erosion, and time itself. Their churches employed acoustic resonance, light manipulation, and spatial alignment to induce psychological and spiritual effects. These techniques echo those used in ancient temples across the world, from Egypt to India, suggesting a shared body of knowledge that transcended culture and religion. If such technologies existed in the ancient past, why were they forgotten? The answer may lie in control. Knowledge empowers individuals. It reduces dependence on authority. It allows people to understand the world without intermediaries. For institutions built on spiritual monopoly, this is unacceptable. Over time, certain forms of knowledge were labeled dangerous, heretical, or forbidden. Texts were destroyed. Teachers silenced. Ideas turned into superstition. The Dark Ages were not dark because humanity lacked intelligence. They were dark because light was deliberately extinguished. The Knights Templar may have stood at the crossroads of remembrance and suppression. They inherited fragments of a lost technological tradition, recognized its potential, and understood its threat. Rather than revealing it openly, they protected it, encoded it, and passed it on quietly. This was not an act of rebellion. It was an act of survival, because history shows us that civilizations do not fall when knowledge is lost. They fall when knowledge is feared. If the Knights Templar truly carried fragments of ancient technological knowledge, they needed a way to preserve it without writing it down. Books could be burned. Scrolls could be seized. Spoken teachings could be tortured out of men. But stone endures. Stone remembers. And so, across Europe, knowledge may have been hidden not in libraries, but in buildings. At first glance, the great cathedrals and Templar churches of medieval Europe appear to be monuments of faith alone. Their soaring arches, stained glass, and towering spires seem designed solely to glorify God. Yet when examined more closely, something unusual emerges. These structures are not just beautiful, they are precise, impossibly precise for their time. And that precision follows rules far older than Christianity itself. Sacred geometry is the belief that certain shapes, proportions, and ratios reflect the underlying structure of the universe. It is found in nature, in the spirals of shells, the branching of trees, the proportions of the human body. Ancient civilizations believed these patterns were not merely aesthetic, but functional. They governed energy flow, resonance, and harmony. To build in accordance with them was to align human creations with cosmic order. Long before Gothic cathedrals, Egyptian temples, Greek sanctuaries, and even prehistoric stone circles were constructed using these principles. Their builders understood that geometry could influence how a space felt, sounded, and functioned. Modern science would eventually rediscover these effects under different names: acoustics, vibration, frequency, and resonance. The Templars, after returning from the East, began to build with a similar language of stone. Their churches often deviate from standard Christian layouts. Round churches, modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, appear throughout Europe. This circular form is significant. In sacred geometry, the circle represents unity, infinity, and containment of energy. It has no beginning and no end. It is not hierarchical. For a church obsessed with hierarchy, this choice is striking. Even more revealing are the proportions of these structures. Ratios, such as the golden mean, appear repeatedly. Measurements align with astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. Light enters certain cathedrals at precise moments, illuminating specific symbols or altars for only a few minutes each year. This is not coincidence. It is calculation. Stone, when shaped and arranged correctly, can amplify sound. Some cathedrals exhibit extraordinary acoustic properties. A single note sung in one location can resonate through the entire structure, lingering far longer than expected. Whispers can travel across vast distances. Chants create vibrations that are felt physically, not just heard. These effects are well documented today, yet medieval builders had no formal understanding of wave physics. Or did they? Ancient cultures believed sound was a creative force. In many traditions, the universe itself was spoken into existence. Modern science confirms that vibration is fundamental to matter. Everything vibrates. Everything resonates. Control the frequency, and you influence the form. If the Templars understood this, even partially, it would explain their architectural choices. Their buildings were not just places of worship. They were instruments, living stone. The idea that stone can store, transmit, or interact with energy may seem fanciful, but research into piezoelectric materials suggests otherwise. Certain stones generate electrical charge under pressure or vibration. Quartz, commonly found in cathedral foundations, exhibits this property. When sound waves pass through it, subtle energy effects occur. Were medieval builders aware of this? Perhaps not in modern terms. But ancient knowledge does not require modern language to function. It requires experience, observation, and repetition. Templar churches often stand on sites already considered sacred long before Christianity arrived. Pagan temples, stone circles, and natural energy points known as ley lines intersect beneath them. By building atop these locations, the Templars tapped into existing networks of resonance and symbolism. They did not erase the past, they layered over it. This practice troubled church authorities. Christianity sought to replace pagan traditions, not integrate them. Yet the Templars seemed unconcerned with such distinctions. For them, truth was not bound to doctrine. It was embedded in the natural world. Symbols carved into Templar structures further support this idea. Interlocking circles, spirals, rosettes, and geometric knots appear alongside Christian iconography. These motifs carry meanings older than the Bible. They represent cycles, balance, and interconnectedness, concepts more aligned with natural philosophy than strict theology. Why encode knowledge this way? Because geometry is universal. It transcends language, culture, and belief. A ratio carved into stone can survive centuries of censorship. A pattern embedded in architecture can teach those who know how to read it. To the untrained eye, it is decoration. To the initiated, it is instruction. The church may have tolerated this at first, viewing it as harmless ornamentation. But over time, patterns emerged. The same geometries appeared across vast distances. The same proportions repeated. This consistency implies a shared blueprint, a transmitted body of knowledge. Such unity was dangerous. If sacred spaces could be designed to induce spiritual experiences without priestly intervention, then faith became personal, direct, and uncontrollable. If enlightenment could be triggered by sound, light, and space, then the church's monopoly on salvation weakened. The Templars were not preaching heresy. They were demonstrating it. By turning stone into a medium of knowledge, they ensured that even if their order was destroyed, their legacy would endure. Cathedrals would stand. Churches would remain in use. Pilgrims would pass through spaces designed to awaken something they could not name. This was knowledge made invisible, power hidden in beauty. And perhaps this is why, centuries later, we still feel something profound when standing inside these ancient structures. A sense of awe that goes beyond belief. A resonance that speaks not to doctrine, but to something older, deeper, and shared. Stone does not forget, and neither does geometry. The rise of the Knights Templar from obscurity to unmatched power happened with unsettling speed. In the span of a few decades, an order that began with 9 poor knights became one of the wealthiest and most influential institutions in medieval Europe. This transformation was not gradual, nor was it easily explained by conventional means. It appeared sudden, coordinated, and almost effortless, as if fueled by an unseen engine operating behind the scenes. Official history offers a simple explanation: donations. Kings, nobles, and pious families across Europe gifted land, gold, and resources to the order in exchange for spiritual favor and protection. On the surface, this makes sense. The Crusades stirred religious fervor, and the Templars were seen as holy warriors. Supporting them was a way to earn salvation. But this explanation collapses under scrutiny. No other religious order experienced anything remotely comparable. Monasteries received donations, yes, but not entire estates across multiple kingdoms. Not fleets of ships. Not exemptions from taxes, laws, and borders. The scale of Templar wealth was unprecedented. More troubling still was how efficiently they managed it. The Templars did not simply hoard riches. They moved them. They protected them. They multiplied them. By the mid-12th century, the order had established what can only be described as Europe's first international banking system. Pilgrims could deposit gold at a Templar preceptory in Paris and withdraw it safely in Jerusalem using encrypted documents. This required standardized accounting, secure communication, trusted verification systems, and an understanding of risk management centuries ahead of its time. Medieval Europe was not ready for such complexity, yet the Templars mastered it effortlessly. Their logistical capabilities were equally astonishing. They maintained supply lines across thousands of miles, moving food, weapons, horses, and men between Europe and the Middle East with clockwork precision. Their fortresses were stocked, their armies provisioned, their fleets maintained. Even modern military organizations would struggle with such coordination without advanced planning tools. Where did this expertise come from? Experience alone cannot account for it. Other Crusader armies, despite vast resources, were plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and collapse. The Templars, by contrast, operated like a machine. Orders were followed. Resources were allocated precisely. Losses were minimized. Waste was rare. This suggests a deeper framework, one rooted in systems thinking rather than medieval tradition. Some historians argue that the Templars inherited administrative knowledge from the Roman world through Islamic intermediaries. Others believe they developed it independently. But both theories overlook a crucial possibility, that the Templars applied ancient principles of organization and logistics rediscovered through forbidden knowledge. Ancient civilizations understood supply, distribution, and infrastructure in ways later societies forgot. The Roman Empire, for example, sustained vast populations through meticulously planned roads, granaries, and taxation systems. When Rome fell, this knowledge fragmented. Europe reverted to localized economies and feudal inefficiency. The Templars seemed to have reversed this process. Their command structure was rigid but adaptive. Information flowed upward and downward without interference. Each preceptory operated autonomously but followed standardized procedures. This balance between central control and local flexibility is a hallmark of advanced organizational design. It is tempting to see this as mere discipline. But discipline does not create innovation. Knowledge does. The Order also demonstrated remarkable engineering capability. Their castles were among the most advanced of their time, incorporating features unknown elsewhere: concentric walls, angled surfaces to deflect projectiles, integrated water systems, and strategic placement based on terrain analysis. These were not improvised defenses. They were calculated responses to known variables. Such precision implies access to technical knowledge beyond common medieval practice. Even more curious is the Templars' relationship with money itself. Unlike nobles who flaunted wealth, the Order treated it as a tool, not a symbol. Gold flowed through their hands without attachment. They understood liquidity, investment, and long-term stability. Their financial practices resemble modern banking more than feudal hoarding. This mindset is revealing. Money, for the Templars, was not power. Power came from control of systems. And systems require understanding of human behavior, material flow, and time. If the Templars had access to ancient texts describing such principles, their success becomes less mysterious. Knowledge once used to sustain empires could be repurposed to build an order immune to the chaos of medieval politics. The Church tolerated this at first, perhaps even benefited from it. The Templars funded crusades, protected pilgrims, and stabilized economies. But tolerance turned to suspicion as their independence grew. Unlike kings, the Templars could not be easily bribed. Unlike bishops, they could not be threatened with excommunication. Their wealth was distributed, hidden, and mobile. Their loyalty was internal. Their strength was systemic. This made them dangerous. Rumors began to circulate that the Templars possessed secret sources of income, hidden treasures, lost relics, technologies that produced wealth without labor. While exaggerated, these rumors reflect a deeper truth. People sensed that the Order's power did not obey normal rules. Their wealth was not the cause of their power. It was the effect. The Church's authority rested on spiritual control. Kings relied on land and lineage. The Templars operated on knowledge and organization. In a world governed by superstition and tradition, this was revolutionary. And revolutions are rarely forgiven. The impossible logistics of the Knights Templar point to something more than piety or luck. They suggest the survival of an older way of thinking, one that viewed society as an interconnected system rather than a hierarchy of divine right. If such thinking came from forbidden technologies or ancient knowledge rediscovered beneath Jerusalem, then the Templars were not merely rich. They were dangerous custodians of a forgotten science of power. And history, as always, would eventually move to silence them. By the late 12th century, an unspoken tension had begun to spread across Christendom. It was not the tension of open rebellion or doctrinal dispute, but something quieter and far more dangerous. It was the tension that arises when authority senses it is no longer the sole keeper of truth. The Knights Templar, once embraced as holy defenders of the faith, had grown into something the Church could not fully understand or control. The medieval Church was built on a fragile balance. Its power rested on the belief that divine truth flowed through a single channel: priesthood, scripture, and sanctioned interpretation. Knowledge outside this structure was not merely incorrect. It was heretical. To question doctrine was to threaten social order itself. In such a world, faith was not just spiritual, it was political. The Templars quietly disrupted this balance. They did not preach against the church. They did not challenge papal authority in public. On the surface, they were obedient servants of Christ. Yet beneath this loyalty lay something unsettling. The order possessed knowledge that did not originate in Rome, knowledge that predated Christianity, knowledge that suggested the divine could be understood, measured, and even replicated. This was not theology. It was dangerous. The church had long struggled to contain natural philosophy. Astronomy was acceptable only if it reinforced Scripture. Mathematics was tolerated so long as it remained abstract. But applied knowledge, knowledge that produced results independent of prayer, was deeply threatening. It implied that the universe operated according to laws, not miracles. And laws do not require priests. The Templars, through their exposure to Eastern scholarship and ancient artifacts, may have crossed this forbidden threshold. Their architecture demonstrated applied geometry. Their logistics reflected systems thinking. Their rituals hinted at symbolic knowledge far older than Christian liturgy. These were not acts of rebellion, but they were acts of independence. Independence was unforgivable. Whispers began to circulate among clergy and nobles alike. The Templars were secretive. They answered only to the Pope, yet even papal authority seemed limited. Their internal meetings were closed. Their rituals unknown. Their symbols unfamiliar. To an institution that thrived on transparency of obedience, secrecy was intolerable. Secrecy breeds fear. Accusations of heresy did not emerge overnight. They grew slowly, fed by misunderstanding and envy. Some claimed the Templars rejected the cross in private ceremonies. Others whispered that they worshipped strange idols. Still others insisted they possessed books forbidden by the church. While many of these accusations were later exaggerated or fabricated, they were rooted in a genuine unease. The Templars knew something they were not sharing. The church had faced similar challenges before. Gnostic sects claimed hidden knowledge. Mystics spoke of direct communion with God. Philosophers questioned literal interpretations of Scripture. In each case, the response was the same: suppression. Texts were burned. Teachers silenced. Ideas erased. But the Templars were different. They were not isolated thinkers or small communities. They were an international organization with armies, fortresses, fleets, and wealth. They were woven into the economic and political fabric of Europe. To move against them required careful planning and the right justification. Heresy provided the excuse. The irony is that the Templars' greatest threat to the church may not have been any specific belief, but their example. They demonstrated that discipline, knowledge, and organization could rival spiritual authority. They showed that power did not need to flow from the altar. It could be built, managed, and sustained through systems. This realization was destabilizing. The church's monopoly on truth depended on mystery. Faith required uncertainty. Miracles required ignorance. If the mechanisms behind sacred phenomena were understood, belief would become optional. Authority would weaken. It is possible that some within the church recognized this danger early on. Rather than confront it directly, they allowed the Templars to operate, watching, waiting, hoping the knowledge would remain contained. But knowledge does not remain still. It spreads quietly, influencing thought, shaping behavior, altering perception. The Templars' use of symbolism and architecture ensured that fragments of their understanding reached beyond the order itself. Cathedrals inspired awe without explanation. Rituals created experiences that bypassed doctrine. People felt something profound without being told what to believe. This bypassing of authority was intolerable. As political climates shifted and monarchs grew indebted to the Templars, the church found allies willing to act. Fear of forbidden knowledge merged with financial resentment and political ambition. The stage was set for a reckoning. Yet even then, the church did not move openly. It waited for the right moment, when the narrative could be controlled when accusations would be believed, when suppression could be framed as purification. The conflict between the Knights Templar and the Church was not a clash of faiths. It was a clash over who had the right to define reality. One side believed truth was revealed and fixed. The other had glimpsed a truth that was discovered, structured, and ancient. A truth that did not belong to any one institution. History would later remember the Templars as heretics, traitors, or victims. But beneath these labels lies a deeper struggle, one that repeats throughout human history. Whenever knowledge threatens authority, authority responds with fear. And fear, when combined with power, always seeks silence. The tragedy of the Templars is not merely that they were destroyed. It is that their knowledge was deemed too dangerous to survive in the open. And so, once again, history chose suppression over understanding. But suppressed knowledge has a way of returning. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, in fragments, waiting for a time when authority no longer fears the truth. As pressure mounted against the Knights Templar, something extraordinary began to happen. Long before their dramatic downfall, the order started to move. Not armies, not men in armor, but assets, knowledge, and objects that could never be allowed to fall into hostile hands. What followed was not chaos, but coordination. A disappearance so precise that it still unsettles historians today. When King Philip IV of France ordered the arrest of the Templars in 1307, his men expected to seize unimaginable wealth. Decades of rumor had painted the order as a bottomless treasury. Gold, relics, secret devices. Yet when the raids began, the vaults were nearly empty. Treasuries that should have overflowed with riches were bare. Records were missing, artifacts unaccounted for. It was as if the order had vanished before it was destroyed. This did not happen by accident. In the months, and possibly years, leading up to the arrests, the Templars appear to have enacted a silent evacuation. Their fleets, particularly those stationed at the port of La Rochelle, disappeared. Ships that should have been easily traced were never seen again. No wrecks, no captured vessels, no official logs. They simply slipped into history's blind spot. La Rochelle was not an ordinary port. It was one of the Templars' most important maritime hubs, connecting their European holdings with trade routes across the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. From here, ships could travel south to Portugal, north to the British Isles, or west into open ocean. The question is not whether the Templars moved something. It is where they moved it. One theory suggests Scotland. At the time, Scotland was excommunicated and beyond the immediate reach of papal authority. Some legends claim Templars fought alongside Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn, protected by secrecy and shared enemies. While direct evidence is scarce, Templar symbols appear mysteriously in Scottish chapels decades later. Another theory points to Portugal, where the order was not destroyed but rebranded as the Order of Christ. Here, Templar knowledge and assets could survive openly, disguised under royal protection. Portugal would later become a maritime superpower, leading the age of exploration with uncanny confidence. Navigation, shipbuilding, and logistics advanced rapidly, as if fueled by inherited expertise. The most controversial theory of all suggests the New World. Long before Columbus, there are hints of transatlantic contact, maps that show coastlines unknown to medieval Europe, legends of lands beyond the sea. If the Templars possessed advanced navigational knowledge, perhaps inherited from ancient civilizations, they may have known of Western lands long before history admits. A hidden fleet vanishing into the Atlantic would explain the complete absence of recovered treasure. Gold is heavy. Ships carrying it leave traces. Unless, of course, the destination was never meant to be found again. But what exactly was being moved? Not just wealth. Wealth can be replaced. Knowledge cannot. The most valuable cargo would have been relics and technologies recovered from the Temple Mount and elsewhere. Objects too dangerous to be discovered by hostile authorities. Texts that could not be burned. Devices that could not be understood without context. These were the true treasures of the order. The speed and secrecy of the evacuation suggest meticulous planning. routes chosen to avoid detection, timing aligned with political distractions, communication secured through internal channels. This level of coordination implies a sophisticated intelligence network operating quietly beneath the surface of medieval politics. Once again, the Templars demonstrated their mastery of systems. The disappearance of these assets created a vacuum. When the trials began, accusations replaced evidence. Torture produced confessions, but no artifacts. No forbidden books. No miraculous devices. The Church condemned ideas it could not produce. This absence is telling. If the Templars were truly heretics engaged in forbidden practices, why was nothing found? Why were no relics displayed to justify the destruction of the order? The simplest answer is that there was nothing left to seize. The knowledge had already moved on. Vanishing technologies leave behind echoes. Architectural patterns appear in unexpected places. Symbols surface in new contexts. Secret traditions persist under different names. The Templars may have understood that survival did not require visibility. It required dispersion. Rather than centralizing their legacy, they scattered it, embedding fragments in different cultures, regions, and institutions. This ensured that no single purge could erase everything. In this sense, the Hidden Fleet was not just an escape. It was a transformation. The Order ceased to exist as a visible institution, but its knowledge survived in shadows. Passed through maritime guilds, royal advisors, secret societies, and coded traditions. What could not be spoken was demonstrated. What could not be written was built. History often mistakes disappearance for defeat, but sometimes disappearance is strategy. The vanishing of the Templar fleet marks the moment when forbidden knowledge slipped beyond the reach of the Church. No longer contained within a single order, it became a diffuse influence, harder to track, harder to suppress. And so, while the world watched the Templars burn, their greatest treasures were already beyond the horizon. On the morning of Friday, October 13th, 1307, silence fell across France in a way that felt unnatural. Orders sealed in wax were opened simultaneously in cities and villages alike. Soldiers moved with precision, not urgency. There was no warning, no negotiation, no public outcry. By nightfall, hundreds of Knights Templar had been arrested, their properties seized, their voices silenced. It was not merely an attack. It was an erasure. King Philip IV of France had been planning this moment for years. Deeply indebted to the Templars and threatened by their independence, he found in them both a financial solution and a convenient scapegoat. But debt alone does not explain the scale of the operation. This was not a localized purge. It was coordinated, methodical, and supported by the highest levels of ecclesiastical authority. The Church sanctioned it. Pope Clement V, despite initial hesitation, eventually aligned with Philip's demands. Whether out of fear, political pressure, or shared suspicion, the papacy allowed the arrest to proceed. The justification was heresy, a charge so vague it could be shaped to fit any narrative. The accusations were shocking. Templars were said to deny Christ, spit on the cross, worship idols, engage in obscene rituals, and possess forbidden knowledge. These claims spread rapidly, fueled by confessions extracted under torture. The public, unaccustomed to questioning authority, accepted the story. But confessions born of pain are not truth. They are survival. What followed was not justice. It was systematic destruction. Templar records were seized or destroyed. Properties were transferred. Libraries vanished. Symbols were defaced. The goal was not to reform the order. It was to remove it from history. This level of thoroughness reveals intent. The Church had dealt with heresies before, but rarely with such urgency or coordination. The Templars were not debating theology. They were not rallying followers. They posed no visible threat, and yet they were eliminated with remarkable speed. Why? Because this was not about belief. It was about control. The Church and the Crown understood something the public did not. The Templars could not be allowed to speak. Their silence had to be permanent. The knowledge they carried, whether technological, philosophical, or symbolic, threatened the foundations of authority. Destroying the order was not enough. Their memory had to be poisoned. And so, history was rewritten. The term Friday the 13th would later become synonymous with bad luck. This association did not exist before 1307. It emerged from trauma, fear, and cultural memory. The day became cursed because it marked the moment when an institution was destroyed not for what it had done, but for what it knew. Templars who refused to confess were executed. Those who confessed were imprisoned for life. A few recanted and were burned alive. The message was clear: silence or death. Yet even in this atmosphere of terror, something remarkable happened. The trials produced no concrete evidence of forbidden technologies. No relics were presented. No devices displayed. The charges rested entirely on words, forced, inconsistent, and contradictory. The absence of physical proof is striking. It suggests that whatever the church feared was already gone. This aligns with the earlier disappearance of the Templar fleet. The erasure came too late. In the aftermath, the order was officially dissolved. Its assets were supposedly transferred to other religious institutions, though much was lost in the process. But the knowledge, if it had ever been centralized, was now scattered beyond retrieval. The church believed it had one. Authority was restored. Silence reigned. But silence is not the same as absence. Symbols endured. Stories survived. Architectural knowledge persisted. The very intensity of the purge ensured that questions would never fully disappear. Why such fear? Why such urgency? Why destroy an order that had served the church faithfully for nearly 2 centuries? The official answers are unsatisfying because they are incomplete. Friday the 13th was not the end of the Knights Templar. It was the end of their visibility. Their erasure was not total, but was effective enough to hide the deeper story beneath layers of accusation and myth. What was lost in the flames was not merely lives, but a path history might have taken, a path where knowledge and faith could coexist without domination. Instead, fear prevailed. And yet, despite the church's best efforts, the erasure was imperfect. Something endured. Something escaped. And that something would resurface in unexpected places centuries later, whispering that the story was not over. When the fires of persecution finally burned out and the Knights Templar were officially erased from existence, the church believed it had succeeded. The order was dissolved. Its leaders were dead or imprisoned. Its name was poisoned. On the surface, the threat appeared neutralized. Yet history has a way of betraying such confidence. Because while institutions can be destroyed, knowledge is far more resilient. The church had eliminated the visible structure of the Templars, but could not reach what had already been dispersed. The greatest mistake of any authority is to assume that power resides in a single place. The Templars had understood this long before their fall. That understanding shaped their survival strategy. What the church could not destroy was what it could not see. Fragments of Templar knowledge were already embedded in stone, ritual, and practice. Architecture endured. Geometry remained. Symbols continued to speak to those who knew how to listen. Even after the order's dissolution, churches and castles built by the Templars were still in use. Pilgrims walked through them. Priests preached within them. Few realized they were moving through encoded spaces, designed to preserve understanding rather than dogma. The symbols alone tell a story of survival. Templar crosses appear in unexpected places long after 1307, carved into walls, hidden in stained glass, etched into maps. These were not acts of nostalgia. They were markers, signals left for others who carried the same fragments of knowledge. A language without words, invisible to those who did not know how to read it. In some regions, former Templars simply vanished into civilian life. Others were absorbed into different orders. In Portugal, the Order of Christ emerged almost seamlessly from the ashes of the Templars, preserving their assets, traditions, and expertise under a new name. The Church allowed this transformation, perhaps unaware of what it truly represented, or perhaps unwilling to provoke another confrontation. The knowledge survived because it adapted. Rather than existing as doctrine, it became method. Rather than being taught openly, it was demonstrated subtly. Engineering principles were passed to builders. Navigational knowledge shared among sailors. Financial systems inherited by merchants. None of this needed to be labeled Templar to endure. This quiet transmission explains why certain advances appear suddenly in European history without clear origin. Techniques emerge fully formed. Systems appear with no obvious precursor. These are the fingerprints of hidden continuity. The Church also failed to destroy oral traditions. Stories passed between craftsmen, guilds, and families preserved ideas long after written records were lost. Allegory replaced explanation. Myth replaced manual. But meaning survived. Some knowledge was hidden deliberately in plain sight. Legends of the Grail persisted, stripped of their technical implications and dressed in romance. The public consumed the story as entertainment, unaware that it concealed fragments of a deeper truth. This transformation of knowledge into myth was not accidental. It was protective camouflage. Even the accusations leveled against the Templars became part of this disguise. Claims of idol worship and secret rites confused the narrative, discouraging serious inquiry. By turning the order into a symbol of scandal, the Church ensured that most would never look deeper. Ironically, this distortion preserved the mystery. The Church could burn books, but it could not burn stone. It could execute men, but it could not erase patterns. Geometry does not require permission to exist. It simply is. As centuries passed, echoes of Templar knowledge resurfaced in unexpected movements. Renaissance thinkers rediscovered ancient texts and principles that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Architects revived proportions long forgotten. Explorers navigated oceans with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Financial institutions adopted systems resembling those pioneered by the Templars. Each of these developments appeared independent. Together, they suggest inheritance. The survival of this knowledge does not imply conspiracy in the modern sense. There was no single hidden council directing events from the shadows. Instead, there was continuity, a chain of understanding passed from one generation to the next by those who recognized its value. This kind of survival is difficult to trace because it leaves no centralized record. It appears as coincidence, as genius, as sudden enlightenment. But history rarely moves in such leaps without foundation. The Church's greatest fear was not that the Templars had committed heresy, but that they had proven something profound, that sacred power could exist outside ecclesiastical control. Once that idea was demonstrated, it could never be fully erased. What the Church could not destroy was the possibility of remembering. And remembering is dangerous, because memory invites comparison. Comparison invites questioning, and questioning leads inevitably to the realization that history, as presented, is incomplete. The Templars may have been silenced, but their legacy endured not through rebellion, but through resilience. Their knowledge did not survive as doctrine or dogma. It survived as influence, quiet, patient, waiting, and perhaps that was their greatest victory. When the Renaissance burst into Europe, historians described it as a miracle, an awakening after centuries of intellectual darkness. Art, science, engineering, and philosophy seemed to reappear almost overnight, as if humanity had suddenly remembered how to think. But memory does not arise from nothing. It is recovered, and beneath the brilliance of the Renaissance lies a quieter story of inheritance, one that may trace back to the suppressed legacy of the Knights Templar. The Renaissance did not begin with ignorance. It began with fragments. Suddenly, ancient Greek and Roman texts resurfaced. Mathematical principles long forgotten were applied with confidence. Perspective appeared in art as if painters had rediscovered the geometry of vision. Architecture returned to proportions that echoed antiquity. Navigation leaped forward. Anatomy was studied with precision once deemed sacrilegious. These advances are often attributed to rediscovered manuscripts and changing attitudes. But rediscovery alone does not explain mastery. Someone had to preserve the knowledge long enough for it to be rediscovered. The fall of the Templars created a paradox. Their destruction coincided not with the end of progress, but with its quiet preparation. In the generations that followed, Europe absorbed ideas that had been hidden, fragmented, and disguised. The Renaissance may have been less a rebirth than a revelation. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci stand at the center of this mystery. Leonardo was not merely an artist. He was an engineer, anatomist, inventor, and visionary. His notebooks reveal concepts centuries ahead of his time: flying machines, hydraulic systems, mechanical automation, anatomical accuracy unmatched until modern medicine. Yet Leonardo did not invent in isolation. He drew upon principles that already existed. His obsession with geometry, proportion, and natural law mirrors the architectural philosophy attributed to the Templars. The same sacred ratios, the same belief that nature followed mathematical order, the same conviction that understanding structure revealed truth. These ideas did not originate in the 15th century. They resurfaced. Leonardo's patrons were also telling. He worked for powerful families and secretive institutions that valued discretion. His most radical ideas were not published. They were recorded privately, encoded in mirror writing, hidden from authorities who might misunderstand or suppress them. This behavior echoes the survival strategies of earlier centuries. The Renaissance was fueled by networks, patrons, scholars, craftsmen, and travelers who exchanged ideas quietly. Many of these networks overlapped with former Templar strongholds. Italy, southern France, Portugal, and parts of Germany all played roles in preserving and transmitting knowledge across generations. Architecture again provides clues. Renaissance buildings revived classical symmetry and proportion with uncanny accuracy. This was not guesswork. It required inherited understanding. The same geometric principles embedded in Templar cathedrals reappeared in Renaissance palaces, churches, and civic spaces. Builders did not explain these principles in religious terms. They treated them as natural law. This shift was subtle but profound. Science, once feared, became respectable when stripped of sacred language. Knowledge survived by changing its clothing. What could not exist as theology reemerged as philosophy. What could not be preached was drawn, measured, and built. The church, weakened by internal conflict and political fragmentation, could no longer enforce absolute intellectual control. But it also could not erase what had already been set in motion. The Renaissance did not challenge authority directly. It bypassed it. This strategy mirrors the Templars' own approach. Rather than confronting power, they embedded knowledge in systems that outlived them. Renaissance thinkers inherited not just texts, but methods, ways of observing, testing, and applying understanding without appealing to doctrine. Even navigation tells this story. The sudden improvement in cartography, ship design, and celestial navigation allowed European explorers to cross oceans with confidence. Portugal, where Templar traditions survived under the Order of Christ, led this expansion. Mariners navigated using stars, geometry, and mathematics rather than superstition. This required trust in natural law. Trust learned somewhere. The Renaissance did not openly acknowledge its debts to suppressed orders. It could not, but its achievements reflect continuity rather than invention. The language changed, the environment softened, but the knowledge remained. In this sense, the Templars did not fail. They delayed. They understood that their time was not yet ready. That knowledge revealed too early invites destruction. Knowledge revealed gradually becomes foundation. The Renaissance was not the end of this process, but its confirmation. It proved that ideas buried deep enough can survive centuries of fear and censorship. It showed that truth does not require institutions to endure, only people willing to remember. And so, when we marvel at Renaissance genius, we may also be witnessing the long echo of a forbidden past, a past carried quietly through stone, symbol, and silence, a past that refused to disappear, waiting patiently for an age less afraid to see it. After the destruction of the Knights Templar, history appears to go quiet again. No great proclamations, no open continuation of their work. Yet beneath this silence, patterns begin to re-emerge, subtle, fragmented, and deliberately obscured. The Templars did not vanish into nothing. They dissolved into something else. And that something left echoes that can still be felt today. Freemasonry is often dismissed as a fraternal organization, a social club wrapped in ritual and symbolism. But its origins are far murkier than modern explanations suggest. Its language, symbols, and structure bear striking resemblance to much older traditions. Traditions that predate its official formation by centuries. Many scholars argue that Freemasonry inherited fragments of knowledge from medieval guilds. Others suggest something deeper, that it absorbed the remnants of suppressed orders like the Templars. This possibility is unsettling but difficult to ignore. Freemasonry places immense importance on geometry, measurement, and architecture. Its foundational myths revolve around builders, specifically the builders of Solomon's Temple. This focus is not symbolic coincidence. It points directly back to the same sacred site that defined the early mission of the Knights Templar. Why would a secretive order emerging centuries later center its identity on the temple if there were no continuity? Masonic rituals speak in allegory, not doctrine. Tools such as the compass, square, and level are treated as symbols of moral and cosmic order. But these tools are also instruments of construction, devices used to impose structure on chaos. In ancient traditions, geometry was not metaphorical. It was functional. It governed energy, harmony, and balance. Freemasonry preserved this understanding quietly. Like the Templars, Freemasons organized themselves into hierarchical degrees of initiation. Knowledge was revealed gradually, not all at once. Secrecy was paramount. Symbols replaced explanation. Allegory replaced instruction. These are survival techniques, not eccentricities. The Church had made it clear what happened to those who claimed forbidden knowledge openly. The lesson was learned. Many Masonic legends speak of a lost word or lost knowledge, something once known, now hidden, awaiting rediscovery. This mirrors the Templar narrative almost perfectly. The idea that essential wisdom was lost, not destroyed, but concealed for safety. In some traditions, the Templars are said to have taken refuge within operative masonry guilds after their suppression. Builders were ideal carriers of forbidden knowledge. Their work required precision, geometry, and long apprenticeships. They traveled freely. They worked in silence, and their craft allowed ideas to be encoded in stone. The transition from operative masonry to speculative Freemasonry may have been the moment when technical knowledge transformed into symbolic teaching. As the danger of suppression lessened, ideas could be shared more openly, but still disguised. This explains why Freemasonry speaks in riddles. The goal was never to create a new religion. It was to preserve a way of thinking, a way of understanding the universe through structure, proportion, and natural law rather than blind obedience. This philosophy aligns far more closely with ancient science than with medieval theology. Other secret orders show similar patterns. Rosicrucianism emerged with claims of hidden wisdom, ancient lineage, and transformative knowledge. Alchemical societies blended spiritual language with experimental practice. Hermetic traditions resurfaced, emphasizing correspondence between the macrocosm and microcosm, a core principle of sacred geometry. These movements did not operate independently. They shared symbols, ideas, and methods. They formed an underground current of thought that flowed beneath official history. The Church viewed these groups with suspicion, yet struggled to suppress them fully. They did not preach rebellion. They did not challenge doctrine directly. Instead, they offered alternative ways of understanding reality, quietly, selectively, and symbolically. This was the same strategy the Templars had perfected. By the time Freemasonry became publicly visible in the early modern period, it was already layered with centuries of inherited tradition. Its rituals felt ancient because they were. Its symbols resonated because they had survived repeated cycles of suppression. Critics often ask why such organizations cloak themselves in secrecy if they have nothing to hide. But secrecy does not always imply malice. Sometimes it implies memory. Memory of what happens when truth is revealed too soon. The echoes of the Templars in these orders are not literal or centralized. There is no single archive, no uninterrupted command structure. Instead, there is continuity of principle. Knowledge passed hand to hand, mind to mind, generation to generation. The most dangerous ideas are rarely destroyed. They are absorbed by embedding themselves within symbols, rituals, and allegories. These traditions ensured survival without confrontation. They learn from the Templars' fate. Visibility invites annihilation. Invisibility invites endurance. And so, even today, when one examines the language of secret orders, one finds the same themes repeating. Lost knowledge, sacred geometry, the temple, the light hidden in darkness. These are not random obsessions. They are reminders. Reminders that history is not a straight line, but a layered structure, much like the Temple Mount itself. And beneath the surface of official narratives, older truths still wait, patiently, for those who know how to dig. For centuries, the knowledge associated with the Knights Templar existed only in fragments. Symbols carved into stone, myths disguised as legend, principles hidden behind ritual and allegory. It seemed safely buried in the past. Yet history has a way of circling back on itself. And in the modern age, something unexpected has begun to happen. Ideas once dismissed as heretical, impossible, or purely mystical are quietly returning. Not through religion, but through science. What was once forbidden is becoming measurable. Modern physics has revealed that the universe is not solid in the way medieval minds imagined. At its most fundamental level, reality is vibration, frequency, and energy. Matter behaves like waves. Space and time bend. Observation alters outcome. These discoveries would have sounded dangerously close to heresy only a few centuries ago. Today, they are accepted facts. This shift has reopened old questions. Ancient civilizations spoke of resonance, harmony, and cosmic order as practical forces. Sacred geometry was not art. It was applied understanding. Sound was not metaphor. It was creation. Light was not symbol. It was substance. For generations, these ideas were buried under theology and superstition. Now they are being rediscovered in laboratories. Researchers studying acoustics have found that certain frequencies can alter brain states, influence emotion, and even affect physical matter. Cymatics, the study of visible sound vibration, reveals geometric patterns identical to those carved into ancient temples and cathedrals. These are not artistic coincidences. They're natural laws expressed visually. Stone responds to vibration. Water organizes itself according to frequency. Human consciousness shifts in response to sound and light. These are the same principles ancient builders appear to understand intuitively. The Templars may not have possessed modern equations, but they did not need them. Knowledge does not require formalization to function. It requires application. Modern architecture is rediscovering what medieval builders encoded instinctively. Structures designed with proportion, light alignment, and acoustic awareness influence human behavior and well-being. Hospitals use sound therapy. Meditation spaces use resonance. Urban planners consider flow and geometry to reduce stress. What was once mystical is now empirical. Energy research tells a similar story. Alternative energy concepts, resonance-based power generation, wireless transmission, and frequency manipulation are no longer fringe ideas. Nikola Tesla, one of history's most misunderstood geniuses, spoke openly about energy, vibration, and the fundamental structure of reality. His ideas were ridiculed, suppressed, and later quietly adopted in modified forms. Tesla's worldview echoes ancient traditions uncannily well. He believed the universe was a system of interconnected frequencies, that energy could be accessed not by combustion, but by resonance, that understanding natural law was the key to limitless power. These ideas frightened institutions built on scarcity and control. The church once feared forbidden knowledge because it threatened spiritual authority. Modern power structures fear it because it threatens economic authority. The pattern is the same. Information that decentralizes power is resisted. Technologies that eliminate dependency are delayed. Ideas that challenge established systems are discredited, not debated. This raises an unsettling possibility. The suppression never ended. It simply changed its language. What the Templars guarded may not have been devices as we imagine them today, but principles, ways of interacting with a natural world that bypass hierarchy and control. Principles that allow individuals to understand rather than obey, to participate rather than submit. Modern science is beginning to validate these principles independently. Quantum physics, neuroscience, and systems theory all point toward a universe governed by relationship rather than command, by pattern rather than decree. Even consciousness is no longer dismissed as purely subjective. Studies suggest it plays a role in reality itself. Observation affects outcome. Intention influences probability. These findings mirror ancient beliefs that mind and matter are not separate. Such ideas were once considered dangerous. They still are. Because if reality can be understood directly, authority loses its monopoly. If individuals can access insight through knowledge rather than permission, control weakens. The Templars may have understood this long before their time. They lived in an age unprepared to handle such implications. Their choice was to hide, encode, and delay, to let the knowledge sleep until the world was ready. Perhaps that time is approaching. The resurgence of interest in sacred geometry, sound healing, alternative energy, and consciousness research suggests a collective remembering, not a return to superstition, but a reconciliation of science and ancient wisdom. This does not mean the Templars were prophets or magicians. It means they stood at a crossroads between a forgotten past and an uncertain future. They glimpsed possibilities their world could not accommodate. The forbidden technologies were not machines waiting to be switched on. They were ways of thinking waiting to be rediscovered. And today, as science peels back layers of reality once deemed unknowable, those ways of thinking no longer seem forbidden. They seem inevitable. History may yet reveal that the greatest legacy of the Knights Templar was not what they built or protected, but what they delayed, until humanity could finally understand it without fear. Because knowledge suppressed is not knowledge destroyed. It is knowledge waiting. The destruction of the Knights Templar was not an isolated tragedy or a medieval anomaly. It was the visible climax of a much older pattern, one that repeats whenever knowledge threatens established authority. To understand why history was rewritten, one must move beyond the surface story of greed, heresy, and political rivalry, and look instead at the deeper fear that drove the suppression itself. Power does not fear rebellion nearly as much as it fears understanding. The medieval church was not simply a religious institution. It was the central nervous system of European civilization. It defined morality, education, law, time, and identity. Kings ruled by divine approval. Knowledge flowed downward from sanctioned sources. Truth was not discovered, it was declared. This structure worked only as long as the church remained the sole interpreter of reality. The Knights Templar disrupted this monopoly without ever openly challenging it. They did not preach a rival theology. They did not call for reform. They did not deny God. What made them dangerous was far more subtle. They demonstrated that power could exist independently of the church's narrative. Their wealth functioned without feudal control. Their logistics operated without royal command. Their knowledge produced results without priestly mediation. This was intolerable. If sacred effects could be achieved through understanding geometry, resonance, and natural law, then miracles were no longer exclusive. If ancient knowledge could explain phenomena attributed to divine intervention, then authority, based on mystery, began to erode. The church understood this instinctively, even if it could not articulate it openly. The suppression of the Templars was therefore not reactionary. It was preventative. History had to be rewritten because the truth was too destabilizing. Acknowledging that advanced knowledge existed before Christianity and survived within a suppressed order would have undermined the Church's claim to unique spiritual authority. It would have forced uncomfortable questions. Where did this knowledge come from? Why was it lost? Who decides what is sacred? The safest solution was silence. Records vanished. Narratives hardened. The Templars were reduced to caricatures. Heretics, idolaters, traitors. Once labeled, they could be dismissed. Few would look deeper into the accusations. Fewer still would ask what was missing. This rewriting extended beyond the order itself. Entire chapters of human capability were erased. The ancient world was portrayed as primitive. The Middle Ages framed as inevitable darkness. Progress was redefined as something that began only after church-approved milestones. This linear story of history served a purpose. It reinforced the idea that humanity required guidance. That knowledge must be granted, not discovered. That authority was benevolent rather than restrictive. The Church did not invent suppression. It inherited it. Earlier civilizations had done the same. Libraries were burned. Teachers silenced. Science is forbidden. Each time, the justification was protection of faith, of order, of society. And each time, the result was amnesia. The Templars stood at the intersection of remembrance and erasure. They had access to knowledge that contradicted the approved version of reality. They understood that revealing it would lead not to enlightenment, but annihilation. And so they chose concealment over confrontation. Their mistake was believing concealment could last forever. The moment knowledge exists, it creates tension. It demands resolution. The Church sensed this tension long before it acted. The trials were not an investigation. They were an execution of a problem. History was rewritten not because the Templars were innocent, but because they were dangerous in a way guilt could not capture. Even today, the suppression echoes. Academic institutions hesitate to explore alternative histories. Archaeological discoveries that challenge established timelines are dismissed or marginalized. Ancient achievements are labeled anomalies rather than evidence. The pattern persists, though its language has changed. Authority still fears disruption. The Great Suppression was not about preserving faith. It was about preserving hierarchy. Faith that questions authority becomes philosophy. Philosophy that questions reality becomes science. Science that questions control becomes revolution. The Church chose survival. By rewriting history, it transformed a crisis of authority into a moral victory. The Templars became villains. The Church became protector. And the deeper questions were buried beneath centuries of repetition. But suppression leaves scars. Why did so many symbols survive? Why do forbidden ideas keep resurfacing? Why does history feel incomplete when examined closely? These are not coincidences. They're symptoms of erasure. The greatest irony is that suppression ultimately failed. Knowledge was delayed, not destroyed. It adapted, fragmented, and waited. It passed through architecture, secret traditions, scientific rediscovery, and cultural memory. The rewriting of history was effective enough to hide the truth, but not enough to eliminate it. Because truth does not require belief to exist. It requires only persistence. The Knights Templar were not erased because they were wrong. They were erased because they were early. And history, rewritten to protect power, still carries the fingerprints of what it tried to forget. What if the story we have been told is only the surface of something far older, far deeper, and far more unsettling than we are comfortable admitting? What if the Knights Templar were not misguided zealots, not heretics, not victims of simple political greed, but guardians of a truth humanity was not ready to face? This question lingers because it refuses to disappear, no matter how often history tries to close the book. To ask whether the Templars were right is not to glorify them. It is to question the assumptions that shape our understanding of progress, authority, and knowledge itself. The modern world prides itself on rationality. We believe we live in an age of science, transparency, and evidence. And yet, Our understanding of history is still filtered through institutions that decide which questions are acceptable and which are not. Entire possibilities are dismissed, not because they are disproven, but because they are inconvenient. The Templars challenge convenience. If they were right, then advanced knowledge existed long before modern civilization claims to have discovered it. Not primitive insight, but structured understanding of geometry, resonance systems, and natural law. If they were right, then humanity did not slowly crawl upward from ignorance. It stumbled, forgot, and remembered in fragments. This possibility changes everything. It suggests that progress is not guaranteed, that knowledge can be lost as easily as it is gained, that civilizations do not always advance. They sometimes retreat deliberately or by force. It also suggests that authority has often acted not as a guardian of truth, but as its gatekeeper. If the Templars were right, then the greatest danger to human development has never been lack of intelligence, but fear of independence. The knowledge attributed to them did not promise domination. It promised understanding, and understanding reduces dependency. A population that understands systems, energy, and structure no longer requires intermediaries to explain reality. Such people become difficult to control. Perhaps this is why the story feels unfinished. Across history, the same themes repeat. Knowledge appears. Authority resists. Suppression follows. Centuries later, rediscovery occurs, celebrated as innovation. Rarely do we ask why that knowledge was lost in the first place. The Templars sit at the center of this cycle. They were not prophets predicting the future. They were custodians remembering the past. Their mistake may have been assuming that truth alone could protect them. History has shown otherwise. Yet even in destruction, they succeeded in one crucial way. They ensured the knowledge did not die with them. They fragmented it, embedded it, disguised it, allowed it to survive in forms that could outlast persecution. This strategy required patience beyond a single lifetime, beyond an order, beyond an era. It required faith, not in doctrine, but in time. If the Templars were right, then humanity has always stood closer to understanding the universe than we are taught to believe. The distance between ancient wisdom and modern science may be far smaller than the gap between power and truth. This idea is uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of inevitability. It tells us that the world we live in is not the natural outcome of progress, but the result of choices, some made to protect, others made to suppress. And if that is true, then the future is equally uncertain. The forbidden technologies of the Templars were never just about devices or relics. They were about perspective, a way of seeing the world as interconnected, ordered, and accessible through understanding rather than obedience. That perspective is returning, not through secret orders or hidden fleets, but through rediscovery, through science uncovering resonance, frequency, and consciousness, through architecture rediscovering harmony, through individuals questioning narratives that no longer satisfy. The return is quiet, just as it was before. Perhaps this time, humanity will choose differently. Perhaps the lesson of the Templars is not that forbidden knowledge is dangerous, but that fear of knowledge is. That suppression delays growth, but never prevents it. That truth buried deep enough will eventually surface, shaped by the era that finds it. The final question is not whether the Knights Templar were right. The question is whether we are ready if they were. Because if history was rewritten once to protect power, it can be rewritten again, this time to restore what was lost. Not through rebellion or destruction, but through understanding. The whispers beneath the Temple Mount have never truly faded. They have only waited, moving from stone to symbol, from symbol to idea, from idea to rediscovery. And now, as humanity stands once more at the edge of understanding forces it barely comprehends, the same choice appears again. Suppress or remember, fear or learn. The Knights Templar chose memory over safety, concealment over obedience, patience over surrender. Their order fell, but their question remains. What if they were right? And what will we do if the answer is yes? Throughout history, The Merovingian dynasty has left an indelible mark on the world, not only through its political power and cultural influence, but also through the symbols and artistic expressions that continue to echo through the ages. For centuries, these symbols, often hidden in plain sight, have been subject to reinterpretation and reimagining. Art, architecture, and religious iconography became vehicles for transmitting the secret knowledge and mystical heritage that many believe the Merovingians preserved. According to certain alternative historians and conspiracy theorists, these symbols contain hidden messages, references to the ancient bloodline, and clues to the broader mysteries surrounding the dynasty. This section explores the ways in which the Merovingian legacy has been encoded in art, architecture, and symbolism, suggesting that the influence of this long-lost dynasty may still be present in the physical world around us. One of the most enduring symbols associated with the Merovingians is the depiction of the fleur-de-lis, a stylized lily that has been widely used throughout European heraldry. While the fleur-de-lis is most commonly associated with the French monarchy, some researchers argue that its roots lie much deeper, possibly tracing back to the Merovingian dynasty itself. The symbol, often thought to represent purity or royalty, is also interpreted by certain scholars and alternative historians as a representation of the divine bloodline, the very lineage that the Merovingians claim to possess. The fleur-de-lis, in this context, becomes more than just a royal emblem. It is seen as a symbol of divine right, of sacred kingship, and of a bloodline that, according to some theories, links directly to Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. The fleur-de-lis is not the only symbol associated with the Merovingians that has endured through the centuries. Another symbol that is often linked to the dynasty is the pentagram, a five-pointed star that has deep roots in both esoteric and pagan traditions. The pentagram is often used in occult and alchemical traditions as a symbol of the five elements and the balance of nature. Some researchers argue that the Merovingians, as guardians of ancient mystical knowledge, may have adopted the pentagram as a secret emblem of their bloodline. The 5 points of the star are seen by some as representing the 5 sacred aspects of the bloodline, each one symbolizing a different aspect of the divine heritage they are believed to have inherited from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. In this interpretation, the pentagram becomes a powerful emblem of the Merovingian legacy, a secret marker of their ancient and sacred role in history. Beyond symbols, the Merovingian legacy is also said to be encoded in the architecture of the buildings and structures they commissioned. Some of the most prominent examples of this can be found in the churches and cathedrals built during the Merovingian period, many of which are said to contain esoteric symbols and hidden messages that reveal the true nature of the dynasty. These buildings were not merely places of worship, but were believed to be designed as sacred spaces that concealed ancient knowledge, waiting to be unlocked by those who knew how to interpret the symbols. One of the most famous examples of this hidden architectural knowledge is the Cathedral of Chartres in France, which, though built long after the fall of the Merovingian dynasty, is often linked to the same esoteric traditions. The cathedral is renowned for its intricate labyrinth, which some researchers believe represents a spiritual journey, a path that mirrors the quest for the Grail or the pursuit of divine knowledge. The labyrinth, in this view, is not just a physical maze, but a symbolic representation of the journey of the soul, a path that leads to enlightenment and transcendence. Some theorists argue that the design of the labyrinth and the cathedral itself are based on ancient Merovingian principles of sacred geometry, meant to reflect the divine order and to encode hidden knowledge for future generations. Other churches and cathedrals across Europe, including the Abbey of St. Denis, which was the burial place of many Merovingian kings, are also believed to contain hidden symbolism that ties them to the dynasty. These structures were not merely designed for religious purposes, but were also meant to serve as repositories of secret knowledge. Researchers suggest that the layout of these buildings, their sculptures, stained glass windows, and even the placement of altars and tombs were intentionally designed to reflect the esoteric traditions and royal legacy of the Merovingians. The very stones of these buildings, it is claimed, encode the secrets of the sacred bloodline, waiting to be deciphered by those who are attuned to the hidden messages they contain. In addition to architecture, the art created during the Merovingian era is said to be infused with symbolism that reflects the dynasty's mystical beliefs and their connection to divine knowledge. One of the most striking examples of this is the illuminated manuscripts produced during the Merovingian period. These intricate works of art, created by monks and scribes, often contain symbolic imagery and esoteric messages embedded within their pages. Some of these manuscripts are believed to contain secret codes and references to the Merovingian bloodline, suggesting that the knowledge of the dynasty was being preserved for future generations. In these manuscripts, the Merovingians are not just depicted as kings, but as spiritual figures, connected to higher realms of knowledge and power. The use of symbolism in art was not limited to religious or royal iconography. It also extended to the depiction of the natural world, which was often imbued with symbolic meaning. The Merovingians, like many other ancient cultures, believed that the natural world contained hidden messages, and they used art to reflect these deeper truths. For example, the use of certain animals in Merovingian art, such as the lion or the serpent, can be interpreted as symbols of power, protection, and transformation. These creatures were believed to embody the qualities of the divine bloodline, representing both the earthly and spiritual aspects of the Merovingian legacy. Beyond their religious and royal imagery, the Merovingian dynasty's symbols are also believed to have been encoded in the mystical and alchemical traditions of the time. Some alternative historians argue that the Merovingians, as keepers of sacred knowledge, may have been involved in the development of early alchemy and occult traditions, which sought to unlock the hidden forces of the universe. In this context, the symbols and motifs associated with the Merovingians, such as the pentagram, the fleur-de-lis, and other sacred geometric patterns, are seen as part of a broader esoteric system of thought, one that was meant to reveal the hidden truths of the universe and the nature of human existence. The use of symbols in Merovingian art and architecture has also been linked to the development of secret societies, particularly the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, both of which are believed to have been influenced by Merovingian traditions. These societies, which emerged in the medieval and Renaissance periods, are said to have adopted many of the symbols and ideas associated with the Merovingians, using them as a means of preserving and transmitting hidden knowledge. The idea that the Merovingians were involved in the creation of secret societies is part of the larger theory that they were not just political rulers, but were also the custodians of ancient, mystical traditions that transcended ordinary history. The legacy of the Merovingians, then, is not just a matter of political power or royal bloodlines. It is a matter of hidden knowledge, encoded in the very fabric of art, architecture, and symbolism that surrounds us. From the cathedrals and churches of Europe to the illuminated manuscripts and alchemical symbols that have endured through the centuries, the Merovingians left behind a legacy that continues to be deciphered by those who seek to uncover the mysteries of the past. Whether or not these symbols and messages are part of a grand, overarching conspiracy or simply remnants of a long-forgotten history, they continue to captivate our imaginations and inspire a search for deeper truths about the nature of power, knowledge, and the human quest for transcendence.